Ice, yeah. No, the night I was looking straight in the guy. There must be something I can do.
Can somebody pick me up the morning of that tour at Cal Fire? My vehicle off, it was booked for 9, but I'll drop it off at 8:45.
That was this Friday?
Next.
Okay.
Before the...
I'm meeting Debbie at 8, so I can't really do that.
Get Debbie to pick me up.
She could pick you up at 4 to 8.
No, I don't need to be there then.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to those in the gallery. Good to see you. Welcome, staff. And good morning, council. I would like to call to order the City of Salmon Arm Development and Planning Services Committee meeting, Monday, October the 7th. You have an agenda in front of you. I'll just check with staff first and see if there's any additions to the agenda.
No changes from staff, Your Worship.
Thank you. Council, are there any additions to the agenda from council? Okay, seeing none. Any disclosure of interest on any items, councillors? Seeing none at this time, we'll go into reports. Item 4. First one is Development Variance Permit Application number VP 501. We have a proposed motion. Would someone like to move that to get it onto the floor? Councillor Cannon, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Thank you. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to explain the proposed variance permit.
Your Worship, Variance Permit 501 application proposes to waive the requirement to install one of 2 fire hydrants required for a development at 5501 46th Avenue Southeast in the Industrial Park. This application is related to a building permit that was applied for back in the spring, and the permit was for a 600 square meter, 6,400 square foot addition to the Talius business building to increase warehouse space and to add a loading bay. That permit was issued in May, and it was issued, we were able to issue the permit because the owner and applicant bonded for the 2 fire hydrants. The 2 fire hydrants are required by the servicing bylaw of the city. The fire hydrant requirements are similar to off-site servicing requirements for subdivision and development throughout the city. It's an off-site requirement, regardless of if there's fire hydrants on site, regardless of the terrain, topography of the property, and site conditions, these fire hydrants are required. Staff are being consistent with the previous 2 applications regarding fire hydrants, and we are recommending that the variance be denied.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Is the owner, applicant, or agent here this morning? Good morning. Good morning. How are you? I'm good, thank you for coming to talk to us this morning. Please come on up to the microphone, and if you'd like to add anything to the director's report, that would be helpful.
I'm just reading this letter for Wolfgang Neudorf.
Thank you.
To the Mayor of Salmon Arm and Council, thank you for taking the time to hear our reasoning for asking to waive the requirement to install a fire hydrant along Otto Road. In addition to the reasons that Mr. Presch has outlined, I would like to present to you a few more ideas to consider. The spacing for hydrants along the subject property along Otto Road as it sits now is very close to meeting the requirements. A gap of only 20 meters exists in the spacing requirements. See Appendix 6. And so adding an additional hydrant will add very little value to reducing the city's liability. The money saved on maintaining the hydrant could be used to offset insurance premiums. Allocating monies toward keeping people safe in our community should be a priority. However, I do not believe this additional hydrant would serve that purpose, but rather is only trying to appease insurance companies. We're all aware of climate change. In this day and age, we are encouraged to do more with less so we can limit the amount of CO2 put into the air. There needs to be put into place a reasonable effort to reduce our CO2 output without putting people at risk. Not putting this hydrant in would achieve that. The fire chief has stated that the fire hydrants in the area are sufficient. Also, as a side note, the School Board 83 property only has one hydrant for its 300 meters of frontage, see Appendix 6, whereas Tallius would have 5 hydrants for its 350 meters of frontage. To approve this variance in no way sets a precedence for future hydrant variances, as each situation is different. To sum up my comments, I would appeal to the greater call of government, which is to provide safe and affordable communities by implementing laws and bylaws without being overburdensome. The lack of common sense is becoming too common and has become overburdensome. Wolfgang Neudorf.
Great, thank you very much for your letter. Could you just give us your name?
My name is Heidi Neudorf.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. Is there anything else you would like to add besides the letter from Wolfgang?
No, that would be all.
Okay, thank you. I'll just see if council has any questions for you at this time.
Sure.
Councillors, do you have any questions for Ms. Neudorf at this time? Okay, thank you very much. You're welcome to have a seat. Councillors, I'm going to open it up to you for questions or comments of staff or the applicant. Councillor Cannon?
I just had a question to staff in regards to the amount for the fire hydrants. Like, how does that amount get figured out? Because it does seem high to me, and I've never put in a fire hydrant before.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon, Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your worship, each estimate is slightly different in the sense that it depends on where the water main is, on which side of the road it's on, and how deep it is. And then as far as the cost estimates that are done up, they're done up by our staff, and there's a 20% admin fee that gets on top of that, which, and then there's also a 25% contingency fee, because we don't like to go back to the owners for more money if it becomes an overcost. So if the price of the installation is less, they get that money back.
And does it happen often that it's less?
Yes, it does. Our staff know where the water mains are. It depends on what happens in the ditch, essentially. If there's problems, then sometimes it does go over. But for the most part, the 25% is, the additional 25% is only for that contingency.
And the fire hydrant has to be put in by our city staff?
That's correct, yes. It's our water system.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Harrison. Thank you, Mayor Harrison. Could I have Appendix 3 just put on the board? And the letter addresses 3 main points, and certainly the presentation today expanded on some of those points. The first one, the first point made about little benefit to the property. We've had this discussion before in other applications, but question through your worship to staff. We don't have a latecomer provision, much like we do for extension of water lines. Is that correct?
Director of Development Services.
We don't have a latecomer option for fire hydrants, your worship.
Thank you.
And as a follow-up to that, your worship, is that down the line, where I think we're going to have other, and certainly the report refers to that, other applications coming forward. We've struggled with this, I'm not going to call it latecomer aspect, but similar to a latecomer contract. Is it onerous to change the bylaw to add on a latecomer provision? And I don't think it'll be in effect for this application, but I'm thinking of other ones down the road.
Director of Development Services.
Your worship, I don't think the latecomer provisions under the Local Government Act would support what Councillor Lavery is talking about.
Latecomers for fire hydrants.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, just looking at the gallery here, I think we have both staff and applicants here. I think certainly that that's too bad. I think we're going to be faced with this similar discussions down the line here. I do recognize that, and your worship, I'll have comments on the overall motion in front of us in a bit, but it is it is a benefit overall, I would argue, on number one. On number two, no binding external requirement that would press the city to implement its bylaw of the 90-meter rule right now. And certainly a reference this morning, we've heard to the school district property and having 300 meters or so between fire hydrants. I think this is a purpose of what we are trying to do in the last year or two, is gradually move at this stage, as opposed to kicking it down the road, to implementation of this standard. So while I recognize the sentiment, I think we are actually gradually moving towards that, and I would argue that we need to do it. And the third point, through your worship to staff, after completion, do we give a cost accounting to the based on the bond and the installation?
Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your worship, it's all done through finance. We don't give a cost accounting, we just give a refund, or we go for additional funds if required.
Do we do a summary of, a general summary of the costs, or is that just a cost figure that's passed on?
Initially, the cost estimate is shared with the applicant.
Okay, thank you, Your worship. And I'll save my overall comments for.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your worship. I'm not, I'll turn myself on. I'm just, if we do an estimate before, I guess I am not going to support a variance, but I do support the request for a cost accounting after the fact. To me, that's only a reasonable request by anybody who's paying, and I mean, if I got back $5,000 per meter, or per fire hydrant after things were done, I'd be happy with that, but I'd still like to know how it was calculated. So I guess all I would say to staff is I think it would be, when somebody is paying for this themselves, I think it would be valuable to provide a cost accounting breakdown. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. All that being said, some of the comments in the letters actually support us doing this. No, we aren't there yet, and no, the fire underwriters are not an insurance company, but the fire underwriters provide guidance and leadership to communities and to insurance companies as to what is the standard. And unless we have something happen, which we haven't on the school board site, we don't have an opportunity to put in the hydrants. So this is just the community moving towards the standard. And to me, the real issue is just not providing a cost accounting at the end of the day. And 15,000 does seem high, so hopefully it is less, which it has been in just about every situation. So personally, I'm not going to support the variance.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Any other questions or comments from council? Okay, I'd just like to bring up Appendix 6. We had it up before.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's the one. So the hydrant on 46, that one, the applicant is willing to put that hydrant in, and there's quite a big gap between the two circumference circles. The other one on Auto Road, is that the same hydrant that we had a request for a variance from the person across the road from?
It's a joint request.
Your worship, I can't give you a 100% answer on that. I don't think so.
Okay, so it's a different hydrant location.
It looks similar. Like this property is very similar to a previous application we reviewed earlier for Dynaflex. It's a double fronting lot with a smaller lot across Auto Road from it, but I don't think this is applicable.
Okay.
No, it's not.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council at this time before I call a question? Okay, all those in favor of the variance? All those opposed? Councillor Lavery, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Cannon, Councillor Eliason opposed. The motion does not pass. So for all people who have applications here at Planning and Development, what happens following the planning meeting is this goes forward to the council meeting. Council will again revisit this and will vote on the same variance motion at the council meeting. Thank thank you very much. We will move on to item 2. This is development variance application number VP 502, JJH Investment Corporation, 5161 60th Avenue Northeast, servicing requirements. We have a proposed motion on the floor, on the screen. Is there a mover and seconder to get this on the table? Councillor Lindgren, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Could I have the Chief Administrative Officer just read the motion? Because it's a little long.
Sure, it's moved by Councillor Lindgren, seconded by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that VP 502 be authorized for issuance for Lot 2, Plan 9322 to vary subdivision and development servicing bylaw number 4163 for the residential development of a single-family dwelling and secondary suite as permitted under the current A2 zoning as follows. Waive the requirement to upgrade the frontages of the subject property, waive the requirement to extend and connect to the sanitary sewer system, and waive the requirement to upgrade the water system.
Great, thank you very much. Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, this is another variance application for 5161 60th Avenue Northeast in the Canoe area. The property fronts 60th Avenue, just east of the Trans-Canada Highway. And there's another undeveloped road along the western property boundary. So the variance is to waive upgrades to this old road that's unconstructed, and also to waive road frontage improvements along the southern parcel line. And those frontage improvements, if this property was zoned commercial and was involving a commercial development, would include full upgrades to the urban standard, including curb, gutter, sidewalk, street lighting, probably fire hydrants, and as well as extending the sanitary sewer system approximately 400 to 500 meters to the property. The existing sanitary sewer system of the city it terminates right here, right beside North Canoe Elementary. And the distance to the property is quite long. The other variance being requested is to not upgrade the water main. There is a water main along the 60th Avenue. It's an older one. It's probably not sized sufficiently for a commercial development. But commercial development is not being requested here. The idea is to allow for reconstruction of a house. There's an older house situated at the southern end of the property, and the idea of the owner is to demolish that house and rebuild another house more closer to the southeastern portion of the property, where it kind of drops off towards the gully and Canoe Creek to the east, but in this general area. And with the A2 zone, this is a historical zone that goes back decades. One can build a house and one can build a detached suite. And the property's not in the ALR, so even better, someone can build a detached suite without a lot of hoops to go through. The other idea is to renovate an accessory building for home occupation commercial use. And the report refers to the home occupation as allowing 1,000 square meters of commercial floor space. That's a typo. It's actually 100 square meters of commercial floor space and 200 square meters of outdoor storage for home occupation. The current zoning is A2. There's no intent right now to rezone to C3, which is the zone supported in this area, but down the road, the owners might want to rezone to C3 and develop the property with commercial, which would involve extending the sanitary sewer system quite a distance.
Great, thank you very much for the detail of that report. Is the applicant present? Hello, good morning. Did you want to come forward and talk to us?
Sure.
That would be great. Please just introduce yourself and then go ahead.
Good morning, I'm Ty Hartwig.
Welcome, Ty. Please talk to us about your property and what you'd like to do.
Oh, I think the fellow here did a good summary so far. We bought it, there's a very, very old house on it. kind of on the fence of whether to renovate that one or to take it down and put up a new one. And it's just structurally not great. It's moldy and this and that. So we are looking to replace that already existing house and all its already existing stuff with another dwelling, and to attach to the sanitary sewer would be kind of unreasonable given where it ends. So any other details, I would be happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you very much. I'll just see if council has any questions for you. Council, any questions for Mr. Hartwick this morning? Councillor Lindgren.
Thanks. Welcome to council. I'm just wondering about the commercial space and what your sort of overall goal is for this property. Are you thinking about, what kind of business are you talking about in there?
For kind of this year-ish, or in our kind of 1 to 5 year idea?
Both would be good.
We're considering using that shop that's there for a business. It's snowmobile parts is kind of the short version. It's really divided into quadrants quite nicely. So one of the quadrants would be dedicated to that, and which is 20 by 30 feet, so falls under the law for that. And in kind of 1 to 5 years, if that snowmobile parts business continues to expand, we might need to upgrade that space. And if while we're doing that, we would consider the market in the city, and see if there's demand for other mixed use commercial in that area, and potentially while we're at it, go down that road for a few more units as well.
Right. So I think what I'm getting at is it a business, or your long-term commercial plan, would it require a larger number of people to be working on the property? Hence the sewer and water upgrades becoming more important.
That's right, yes. In 1 to 5 years, it likely probably could have more people, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. More of a question for clarification for staff, but it may be partially answered by the applicant. So just to be clear right now, zoned A2, long time zone for agricultural areas, but not ALR, designated highway commercial in the OCP, and in your application you said maybe 3 to 5 years you might look at commercial and work with the neighborhood to do water sewer. I think staff in supporting this is supporting it because it's considered residential, and then if they want a home-based business, it is eligible for that. Is that correct, staff?
Yes, it's eligible for a home-based business on A2, and given the parcel size, they're allowed to have 100 square meters of floor area for the commercial use.
Right.
And it's fairly broad. It's basically, it's any type of commercial use that doesn't cause a nuisance. And also 200 square meters of outside storage is permitted too. And there's also an option for the applicant to apply for a temporary commercial permit if they wanted to expand beyond that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. Hi. I'm wondering through you, Your Worship, if the applicant has had an opportunity to speak to the neighbors.
That's a question for me?
Yeah.
About what?
About that you're applying for a variance.
I haven't seen that I haven't discussed this one with the neighbors yet.
Am I right in assuming that the neighbors would be advised that a variance has been applied for?
Just check with Director of Development Services.
Yes, the neighbors have been advised by a letter.
Okay. Yeah, so it'll come back to council. It's always good to have a visit with the neighbors, and or in my view, and but granted that there are a lot of similar type businesses operating in that area. So.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Any other questions or comments from council? Okay, I'll just make my comments. First of all, you're exactly the kind of person that we want in this city. Young, enthusiastic, entrepreneurial. So, appreciate you coming here. And the property you've purchased is a really nice property. I noticed when I went out there, there's all the cars that are on this picture are not actually there anymore. And the house that you spoke of does look like it's had better days. Is there anyone, like, are you living on the property presently?
No.
Okay, that's what I thought. All right, thank you very much. Those are my questions for you. For staff, the rezoning would allow secondary suite. Secondary suite could be within the dwelling, or it could be separate building, is that correct?
So right now, it's just a variance application. There's no rezoning. The current zone allows a single-family dwelling and a detached suite.
Okay. Just for my information, could a detached suite be a modular home?
Actually, the bylaw says a detached suite shall not be a modular home or a mobile home, and the intent of that is for a single wide. So we have stretched our definition to allow for modular homes as long as they're not a single wide.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. I know that's not pertinent to the variance request, but it could be pertinent down the road. Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council at this time? Comments? Councillor Flynn.
Just a comment, I will support this. I think this is a perfect initial use of this. I do want to make it clear, though, that supporting this, if you do apply for rezoning to commercial and try to expand, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't look at that at the time, possibly completely differently with regards to the upgrades, but I will support this at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Eliason.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the application. I agree with Councillor Flynn. I will support this as proposed, but when we get into commercial there, the water, the roads, and the undeveloped road and traffic access to and from the highway will be a major factor in that. And I can't say that I would support very many variances or changes on the commercial redevelopment. So just so you have full warning and full knowledge that the commercial part will definitely not be as easy as this.
Yeah, totally.
My expectations. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Lassen. Any other comments from council? Call the question, and all those in favor? Any opposed? Passed unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll go on to item 3, official community plan amendment application, Cornerstone Christian Reformed Church, Roosnet, 1161 22nd Street Northeast. We have a proposed motion. Thank you, Councillor Eliason. Seconder to that motion, Councillor Cannon. I know this is a long motion, but I think we should read it just so everyone in the gallery and council is well aware. Thank you to Chief Administrative Officer.
Sure, and this first part is not very long, Your Worship, because it just deals with the OCP.
Thank you.
So moved by Councillor Eliason, seconded by Councillor Cannon, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that a bylaw be prepared, adoption of which would amend OCP bylaw 4000 by redesignating the land use from highway commercial to institutional.
Great, thank you. And the item following is the zoning amendment application. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to explain the OCP request.
Your Worship, the applicant is Mr. Ed Rudzant, and the owner is the Cornerstone Christian Reformed Church. The property in question is located on 11th Avenue Northeast and 22nd Street Northeast. This is the Comfort Hotel. There's a new strata development or rental 16-unit development on this property to the west. This property is actually tied to this property on the other side of 11th. It's hooked. And the proposal is to redesignate the OCP land use designation from from highway commercial to institutional to support a rezoning from R1 to P3.
Great, thank you very much. I know that the applicant's in the audience. Would you like to come forward and speak to us a little bit further about your application? You could speak about both OCP and zoning, because we're going to do the zoning one right behind it.
Yes, good morning. Yeah, we have the property with the church building on it that hooks across the frontage road. And that little triangle drawn there is an actual separate title and piece of property. And we're just simply looking just to join them together. It's been this way for a long time, and the property itself doesn't really suit, to me, a commercial use. It's got quite a drop in there and it's a small little triangle. So we're just looking to clean up our property, and with the future plan of maybe some renovations we've just started talking about, and just simply make it simpler instead of having that triangle as part of that same looking lot. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll just see if councillors have any questions. Councillor Eliason?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Mine's for staff. So this property is hooked to the property adjacent. Can you show it the marker there, which one it's hooked to? So what we're essentially what we're doing is we're keeping them hooked, but we're going to do a split zone on the properties. Is that the case?
Yes, that's correct. And there's an application to amalgamate this piece into this.
Okay, realignment. All right.
If I may, I believe the purple section there is officially hooked with across the frontage. That triangle is by itself.
We'll just get clarification from Director of Development Services.
As it's shown in.
Okay.
It's either way. It's 6.5 dozen.
Regardless, this is the land that's proposed.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on what the overall goal was to separate them via the road. Okay, thank you.
A good question, thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, to me, I mean, I'm going to support this, but to me, it isn't 6 or 1, half, whatever. To me, if we're joining this triangle with the purple, the bigger piece, to make one property, to me, we should be, if it's the triangle that's hooked, we should be unhooking it. And if it's the bigger piece that's hooked, I'm not sure why we wouldn't unhook it now too, because I am pretty confident if I'm at this table and it ever came forward to do anything but highway commercial with the bigger piece across the road, I wouldn't support it. So I guess I'm asking staff and yourselves why we wouldn't unhook while we do all this, because the hooking doesn't make sense to me.
I'll ask the Director of Development Services, and then the applicant can respond if he wishes.
Your Worship, we do have an application for subdivision, and it involves amalgamating this piece here with this. And my understanding is either this piece or this piece, I don't know right now, is hooked to this piece.
Okay. I think Councillor Flynn's question is the rectangular looking piece, if you just move the cursor south, that piece, what we're doing today does not affect the OCP or zoning for that piece in any way, is that correct?
That's correct. This piece is not proposed to change to institutional. This piece would stay commercial.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Flynn, I'll pass it back to
No,
you.
but thank you, Mayor Harrison, for making it a little more clear. But the intent of my question was, why wouldn't we unhook while we do all this too? It's kind of an additional question to, I know it's not impacted by this, but wouldn't this make sense if we're going to amalgamate that to unhook that as well?
Let's ask the applicant that question.
Yeah, it has been our intention in the past. We've attempted to sell that part, and then at which point it would probably be rezoned and go through those steps. We have never had any interest, but we continue to be open to that. If it was changed back to commercial, it would put us under extra pressure again, because I'm assuming, you know, the tax base would be different and that sort of stuff. So we are open to that, and we would prefer to move forward if we had somebody interested in developing that piece, at which point we would be more than comfortable, because once again, we're not really able to use that piece. But
Well, and just to be clear, if it's unhooked, it's still zoned the way it's zoned, and somebody would have to apply to rezone it. I just think part of the issue might be that it's hooked and it causes extra step at that time. So it's probably not even important, but I think it is long-term.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Eliason.
Thanks, Your Worship. Now, this isn't for the applicant. This is more for engineering comments on page 61. Roads and access. If this property was amalgamated with the property to the north, the existing building, would that change anything that has been discussed as far as the upgrades of 22nd, the single access onto 22nd only and not onto the other frontage road, so on and so forth, the road dedications, everything like that?
It's the same.
it would remain the same. So limited access onto the road where there's already an access, and access to 22nd, which is between there and the hotel, and then the same water, sewer, frontage upgrades, road dedications,
Correct.
etc. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lassen. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Harrison. If we go to page 59 on the agenda, and it's a clarification question through you, Your Worship. There's a number of road access and water recommendations. Does that get triggered with either the OCP or the zoning review that then becomes a onus on the applicant to improve, or does that not until there's an application for development?
Your Worship, for clarification, are we talking about this page, 59?
59, yes.
Okay, so all these servicing requirements are not being triggered here. This is just a heads up to the applicant and the owner about what would be required with a development on either property. And there, like I said, there is a subdivision application, but because it's a consolidation of properties, none of these are being triggered.
Thank you for that question. That had my concern as well.
Okay. Well, the answer probably satisfies both of us then.
Yep.
So, and Your Worship, I just have one other, it's a comment rather than a question. I'm going to support this application, and it has to do with housing. And I don't think we need to spend a lot of time at this table now on here, but there are some very interesting provincial government initiatives for those who might want to undertake housing. Affordable housing options. They can be varied as to who it's targeted to. It could be retirement or whatever else. One of the things we know, and one of the big challenges, is one of the initiatives actually remove some of the financial barriers and make it easier for organizations, specifically faith-based organizations, to consider building and utilizing their land. And we also know that faith-based organizations tend at times to have available land, sometimes close to population centers where we most want it. So I would just, I don't, it's not a clinker in the works here, but certainly if there was further interest or discussion, Councillor Wallace-Richmond and I have talked with the faith-based interministry periodically about some of these options, and we'd be available to discuss that with the church. We don't provide the options, but we kind of are trying to help navigate options so that communities can look at utilizing their land. So I would just extend that offer to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lavery, and I think that's going through all our minds, so appreciate you bringing it up. Councillors, is there any other questions for staff or for the applicant before I call a question? Seeing none, I'll call a question on the OCP application. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. We'll move now to the second piece of this, which is a zoning amendment application. We'll get a proposed, thank you, yes, we've seen it. Thank you, Councillor Cannon. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to talk to us about the zoning piece.
The rezoning being requested is for this piece here, the polygon from R1, single-family residential, to P3, institutional. The rest of the property is zoned P3, where the church itself is located is P3, and where it is hooked from here to here is P3 as well. But in the OCP, this is highway commercial, as discussed. Just like to mention, if this was unhooked, that would trigger a subdivision, and then the upgrades would be required along this side of the street.
Great, thank you for that, making that point. I'd ask the applicant if he wants to add anything to the director's report on the rezoning piece.
I don't think so. It's the same information as previous. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any comments or any questions? I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. So just as far as timing of this goes, because it's an OCP amendment, that would take a little longer, right? So when would we expect this to be on the council agenda?
Your Worship, you're correct. Because an OCP amendment is involved, it slows down the process a bit. The readings of the bylaw consist of first reading only of both the OCP and zoning at the next council meeting, And then the subsequent council meeting in October would be second reading only. And that's because the Local Government Act says that council has to consider a bunch of things for these. And then the public hearing would be in November.
So that would be Tuesday, November the 12th at 7 p.m. Okay, if it's any different, we'll let you know, but that's what we think it will be.
And that's when the sign has to be posted by the applicant 10 days before that, and we'll let them know.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, let's move forward then to item 5, zoning amendment application number 1156, Nova Capital Limited, McDermott, 870 10th Street Northeast, R1 to R8. Can I have a mover to get this on the floor? Councillor Wallace Richmond, thank you. Councillor Lindgren seconds. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to explain the proposal to us.
Your Worship, the proposal is to rezone the property located at 870 10th Street Northeast from R1, single-family residential, to R8, residential suite zone. The property is designated high-density residential in the OCP, which supports R5 zoning. What is being proposed here is R8, which would allow for, it would facilitate a subdivision of the property, and there is an application to split this lot into two. And with that subdivision and the R8 zoning, one of the lots could have a house with a suite in the house, and the other lot may be large enough for a house and a detached suite. I believe there's a subdivision sketch plan attached to this report. Here it is. And as you can see, access is proposed off the 9th Avenue frontage to this proposed lot to the east. The property is large enough that it qualifies for the infill exemption for road frontage improvements. Has a fairly large frontage with a lane, 10th Street and 9th Avenue. But for clarification, this exemption does not apply to city mains, such as the water and sanitary and storm mains. We are working through the subdivision application and investigating what is actually required for that.
Great, thank you very much. Is there a representative for the applicant in the gallery this morning? Okay, seeing none, I will open it up to councillors for questions of staff or comments. Councillor Flynn.
So today we are just dealing with the rezoning, not the splitting or anything else.
That's correct. It is a rezoning for the complete property.
Okay. So I will vote in support. I think, unfortunately, although the designation for the OCP for all of this area is high density, I think the reality is that may be some time away. So I think this is, if we end up with 4 total residences from this, I think that's a good thing, good infill. I don't see a high rise there as much as we have designated it as high density, so I will vote to support. I guess my only concern, that splitting, which isn't what we're talking about today, and the way that was drawn, are we going to be dealing with a variance for how close that existing house is to the new lot line, potentially? And that doesn't really matter in the decision today. I just want to know your thoughts on that.
Director of Development Services.
That one corner piece, is that
So this corner is shown to be 1.5,
right?
and that's the minimum for a side yard.
Okay, thanks. I will vote to support.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Okay, I think Councillor Flynn has done a good synopsis of this property and echoes my feelings as well, so I will also support. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. We'll move to item 4.6, zoning amendment application number 1158, Larson, 531 5th Street Southeast, R1 to R8. Have a proposed motion on the screen. Councillor Eliason, seconder. Councillor Flynn, thank you. Director of Development Services.
This is another application to rezone a property from R1 single family to R8 residential suite zone. This property is located at 531 5th Street Southeast, just south of City Hall here. It's a rectangular shaped property. It has some sloping and topography challenges on it. It's a little bit too narrow to be rezoned to R5 and a little bit too small for R5 high density development. And R8 zoning is probably better suited for this property.
Great, thank you very much. Is there a representative from the applicant in the audience? Would you like to come forward and talk to us about your application?
Good morning. There's not a whole lot to add. Our plans are to, down the road, eventually build a single-family residence with a basement suite. And we're just looking for the rezoning.
Great, thank you very much. I'll just see if there's any questions from councillors for you or for staff. Staff, do you have any questions? Any comments? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I certainly will support it at the stage moving forward, and it's really the type of infill development that we have been encouraging and seeing, and it's maximization of a downtown lot, so I support this. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? I certainly support Councillor Lavery's comments as well. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. So public hearing for that particular one would be second meeting in October, is that correct? So that will be October 28th, 7 p.m. Okay. You may wish to talk to your neighbors as well, just the ones immediately beside you. Thank you. All right, we'll move to 4.7, strata conversion of a previously occupied building, Jobeck Enterprises, 2018 11th Avenue Northeast. We have a proposed motion. Have a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor. Councillor Wallace-Richmond, Councillor Lindgren, thank you. Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, this is a proposal to stratify buildings that are currently occupied by residences. This development was approved by a development permit and rezoning just a few years ago, like within the last 2 years for sure. And the development is near completion. It's not quite complete. There's 16 units under construction on this property, which was rezoned from R1 to R5. And a development permit was approved for 16 units, as mentioned. Basically, the Strata Property Act says that any building that's been occupied needs council's approval before the approving officer can approve a strata plan. And I think, if I can say this, and Mr. Richardson might be able to clarify, it was a little bit of a mistake to allow people to be occupied before the buildings were stratified in this case. There was a big demand for rental, and Mr. Richardson allowed the buildings to be occupied, I think, without the understanding that the strata plans had to be approved before they could be occupied. Otherwise, we would be in the situation we are in right now. Staff are supporting this. The 16 units are permitted under the R5 zone. The intent is that all the units will be rented. The investment and financial scenario behind this requires stratification. The lending institutions would prefer to have that model. So staff are recommending approval of this. There is no density bonus for rental units involved with this. 16 units are permitted by R5.
Great, thank you. And just clarification before I ask Mr. Richardson to come forward. If an applicant were to apply for stratification before any renters moved in, the approving officer would be able to okay that without coming to council, is that correct?
Yes.
And there's no covenant on this property regarding rental?
That's right.
All right, thank you. Mr. Richardson, good morning. Great to have you back at council.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, Council.
Please talk to us about what you'd like to do here.
Yeah, so obviously we brought this to Council a couple of years ago, as it was stated. It's always been our intention to have a rental as we do like other properties, and I guess we ran into a scenario where we did take on an investor, and we did approach our lawyer, and he advised us, well, just do the job, and at the end we'll stratify it. It was always our intention to stratify it, but to keep it as a rental. As long as rental is required in this town, our intention is to keep it. The reason that we did it this way, as we explained in a letter, is simply because for us to borrow the money to complete the project, to keep it as one parcel, is the simplest way. And it just became more complicated and more costly to do it with stratifying as we did. We have done this before in other communities, and we never really understood this, and it was our lawyer's advice that, just stratify it at the end. So that's why we ran into this, and it was kind of raised eyebrows when we came in and said, okay, we're ready to stratify this. So it was a bit of a mistake on our lawyer's part and ours. I'm not here to level blame at anybody else, but basically the intention is just to stratify it. 2 of the units will go to the investor. We will manage it for them, and we will keep the rest. And that's the only real reason for stratifying it. If we're not able to stratify it, then we're going to have to figure out a way to buy the units off the investor. So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, thank you very much for explaining that. I'll see if council has any questions for you or questions for staff. Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Mayor Harrison. Thank you, Graham, for being here. And it's almost like old home week here when I'm looking out in the gallery of others that are here for other matters. I have some questions regarding the strata process, because this is new to me as well here. If we could have page 94 of our agenda, and I want to refer to section 6A and then sections 7. And I guess this has to do, and through you, Your Worship, I'll ask staff in a little bit about covenants on rental. So I know that what you're saying is, hey, our intent all along was, and it continues to be, rental properties that will now have 2 owners essentially, and with the intent of going forward with rental properties. The previous council did give some variances based on the assurance that it was rental property, so I guess I have that in my mind as well. So 6A says, in making its decisions, the approving authority, and through Your Worship, I'm assuming that is us. Is that correct?
Yes.
The priority of rental accommodations over privately owned housing in the area. And then 7 says, if the approving authority approves a strata plan without terms and conditions, and so forth. So my question to start off with, for staff and then for the applicant, is, through Your Worship, to staff, can we put a covenant on it being essentially codifying what the intent of the applicant is, to codify it that it is rental property for X amount of years?
Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, council would be within its right to ask for such a covenant.
Okay, and you'd like Mr. Richardson to respond to that same question?
I would, thank you.
Yeah, we definitely can consider that, no problem at all. Staff actually mentioned that you may be wanting to put something like that forward, and that's no problem to us. Only question I would have, maybe time frame. What sort of time frame you may, because I'll have to take that to the investor. That would be my only question, is what sort of time frame you'd be looking at for that.
And actually, that's a great lead into my question about time frame and process as well. Through you, Your Worship, to staff, does this then come back to council as a first, second, third reading at a later date, or is there a number of, again, I haven't seen a strata plan request coming before us. What is the process?
Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, it is not a bylaw, so what is needed is a council resolution to approve the plan or not, or with conditions at one council meeting.
Procedurally, Your Worship, my thinking is that I personally would like to see a covenant on there. I'm not sure the amount of years, and in some ways I would like to put it back to the applicant and staff to come back with a recommendation of that. I'm feeling at this stage I can vote for this in principle and let the applicant and staff, but I'm not sure if we can do that, let the applicant and staff come back when it comes in front of council with a suggestion of the term.
I'll ask the Director of Development Services if council were to pass this in principle today and at the public hearing for council 2 weeks from now, would it be possible for Councillor Lavery to bring forward that amendment?
Your Worship, I don't think there's enough time to come to an agreement. I could be wrong, but I guess staff is not recommending a covenant because, as mentioned in the report, this development did not involve a density bonus. If it involved a density bonus where the threshold of density was above 16 units, then staff would have been recommending a covenant. But if council wants to have a covenant put on, then we'd probably have to delay this until the second council meeting in October to come up with an agreement.
So just for staff's purpose, would it be better for council to decide today as a group whether they want staff and the applicant to look into this or not? Okay, so that's good information, and I'll leave it with Councillor Lavery at this time.
At this stage, I'll consider making a motion, but I'd like, if others have thoughts on that, I'd let them proceed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Eliason.
Thanks. And we don't see a lot of strata conversions here at the city, so this is new to all of us. So thanks for your questions. The strata details, and just would it be buildings A, B, and C as one part of the strata, and buildings D and E as the other part of the strata? Is that the intention, or is each unit within each building an individual strata lot? Can staff please explain that to me? So we would have all the strata lots there, correct?
Yes, the intent is to stratify each unit individually.
Okay.
So it's under one strata.
Yeah, with 2 owners.
With common property.
Perfect. My question is then for the developer, are these 3-bedroom, 2 bathrooms?
There's a mixture.
Mixture of 2 and 2 and
Yeah,
2
all
and
the
3.
middle units on the far side, like with us, the 3 buildings.
Yeah.
All the middle units on the 2 outside ones are 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and the 3-plex in the middle 2-bedroom, 2-bath. So you've basically got the end units on the 2 far buildings that are 3-bedroom, 3-bath.
Okay, thanks, and just thanks for the clarification. So we've been begging for rental units. The applicant comes and says, I want to build right-size rental units for your community. We said, okay. They want to be able to do this again. I urge us to say, yeah, it's okay. If the developer, who is one of the few people to build, there's 2 people who are building multifamily rentals in Salmon Arm, Mr. Ponich and Mr. Richardson, if he came to us and said, hey guys, I need to sell this building, and you've tied it up as a rental or encumbered me for the next 10 years, but I want to build more affordable housing for your city, but I can't because you've done this, then we're tying the hands of somebody who's trying to help our community and grow our rental stock in a private manner. We're going to talk about the other project. If for example, the next project that we're talking about that this afternoon or this morning, he said, hey guys, I need to sell these strata lots so I can build the second phase of this other important building in your community. And we're like, well, you know, you can't do that. We need to make sure that these are here. So I don't think putting a covenant on here is the right thing to do for this development at this time. I think by allowing the developer to have his hands free to speed this up in good faith, as he's acted in good faith for us. He said they're rentals. He's still finishing them. They're going to be rentals. I think it would be unfriendly for us to put that covenant on. Not that it might not be the right thing in some circumstances, but with the dire need for housing that we're experiencing, I think it would be short-sighted of us at this time, or unfriendly. And I think that the friendly thing to do is to not put a covenant on. So I would vote against any amendment or any delay on this.
Thank you, Councillor Lyson. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, I wouldn't support any kind of covenant. Had there been density bonusing, I would possibly support a covenant, but to me, if long-term, let's say 3, 4, 5 years down the road, or 10 years down the road, somebody wanted to buy 2 of the properties or 1, I wouldn't have a problem with a mixed rental and ownership. I know your intent is to rent. I don't want to put any restrictions on what is done moving forward. I completely support Councillor Lyson's comments, so I don't want to ask staff to spend the time, but we're only 2 out of 7.
No, appreciate your comments. Councillor Cannon.
I too wouldn't support a covenant for all the reasons that Councillor Flynn and Eliason just spoke on, and I think it just adds extra red tape, and covenants come at a charge also to put them on properties, so I wouldn't support it as well.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Any other comments about that, the covenant piece, or any other piece of this application before I call the question? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Worship, and I actually appreciate the discussion, and for me, actually, this is, again, in 5 years, the first strata thing coming in front of us, and I have a mixed mind about the covenant as well. I can also count. We do not have a situation, I think where covenants are most effective is when it's a renoviction sort of scenario, where you're losing rental housing stock, people are forced out and go for it. It's clearly, this is not the case at this stage, and it's market rental that is mid upper market in some ways rental on this. So I think that the lack of a covenant, I mean, I've been considering it, but I agree with the rationale that's been said here, and support this moving on.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Any other comments from council? Okay, just my comment. First of all, thank you for bringing that discussion forward. I think it was a good discussion to have. I agree as well that I wouldn't support a covenant on this particular property. And for the same reasons, but also we are trying to look after the whole housing spectrum here in Salmon Arm. And one of the pieces that is the most difficult to try to promote is the affordability of first-time buyers into properties. And by placing a covenant here, that would eliminate that possibility. So appreciate the discussion. I too would not support a covenant at this time. Any other comments before call a question? All right, then, all those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move forward. Item 8, telecommunications facility referral, cellular tower installation, Rogers Communication, 5790 Canoe Beach Drive Northeast. We have a proposed motion of a mover and seconder to get on the floor. Councillor Lyson, Councillor Cannon, thank you. Could I have the CAO just read the motion so everyone's clear on what it is?
Moved by Councillor Lyson, seconded by Councillor Cannon, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that the City of Salmon Arm has been consulted regarding the proposed installation of a telecommunications facility on Lot 1, Plan 6297, as described in the information package dated September 3rd, 2019, attached as Appendix 4, and that the City of Salmon Arm concurs that the proposal satisfactorily addresses the city policy requirements.
Thank you very much. Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, Rogers Communication is proposing to locate a cellular antenna on the property located at 590 Canoe Beach Drive Northeast, near the Canoe Sawmill, as shown on this aerial photo. The proposed location is a parking lot for the Canoe Sawmill across Canoe Beach Drive and the CP rail tracks. The property is designated in the official community plan as in heavy industrial, and it is zoned for industrial use. The proposed tower height is 20 meters. There is an existing pole in the approximate location of the proposed new tower. And that pole is about 12 meters in height. Rogers has included a rendering photo type idea to show what it might look like from Canoe Beach Drive. The City of Salmon Arm has a policy, consultation policy regarding radio antennas and cell towers, and Garth Jones from Rogers has followed that policy, and in the opinion of staff, the proposal meets our policy. The consultation occurred in the summer. There was about 26 entities that were mailed out to of this proposal, and out of those 26, about 5 of those were private property owners, residences, and there was no negative input received, at least from the city, on this. And I think Garth Jones is here today.
Great, thank you. Mr. Jones, good morning. Would you like to come forward?
Good. Yes, thank you.
Welcome to council. Thanks for coming and speaking to us. Anything you would like to add to the director's report?
No, I think it's laid out well there. Rogers is part of a larger investment in the area that Rogers is making to improve fast and reliable coverage. This is an area we've been pursuing for a while. We did do consultation and reach out, and we did receive no feedback at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll open up to council, see if they have questions for yourself or for staff. Council, any questions that you would like to ask at this time? Councillor Eliason.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be voting in support of this, but I just wanted to ask if you have any more plans for any other locations, like in the industrial park or something, to get the dead spot off the Canoe straight stretch just over the hill.
Yes, we do have a couple other locations that we're pursuing actively right now, but we don't have anything solid yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, Your Worship. One aesthetic question, actually, and I believe it was a Rogers Tower up on the hill up south of town on Mount Ida, and there was a recommendation to have it green. Green as in color. Mm-hmm. So and I have no aesthetic taste at all. My question is to either staff or the applicant. Has there been discussion of what is the best color to make it blend in? When I drive by there, I kind of see the green in the background. Has that been a topic of discussion or negotiation? And if so, is there a recommendation or a plan?
Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, no, there was no discussion on that. I guess if you look at this photo on 103, it's kind of the same color as the gray sky behind it. But no, there was no particular design or colors talked about with this.
Mr. Jones, is that something that Rogers would consider if council?
Certainly, and we've done that in a number of other locations.
Okay, so to staff, how would council facilitate that discussion and influence it if they thought there was a better color than silver?
Council would relay what their preference would be to staff and the proponent.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Lavery?
Your Worship, I'm without putting extra burden on staff, I'm completely comfortable with a discussion between the applicant and staff. If it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, I think Councillor Flynn, that was brought up earlier, that I'd be fine with whatever the way to proceed. And I don't even know with the one on the slopes of Mount Ida how the color green came about in the first place. I just know that the recommendation was to have it that way. So I'm certainly comfortable leaving that. I just wanted to raise it as a point of consideration, and I'm comfortable being between the applicant and staff, personally.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from councillors? Okay, could I just ask, I know one of our policies is, if at all possible, can antennas be put on poles that are already there? And I know this report says that was looked at, but is not a possibility. Can you just comment on it for us?
So typically we would prefer to use existing infrastructure, and that's the federal regulation guides us towards that. It's cheaper for us to build and deploy our equipment. In this case, we did approach TELUS and asked them if we could place on their tower, but it did not provide the sufficient height to provide the necessary coverage. So once we've exhausted those co-location opportunities, we would investigate placing our own tower, which is what's happened here.
Okay, understand, thank you. Councillor Lindgren.
Thanks. I'm just wondering what is going to be sort of emanating from this tower. Is this a 4G type tower or?
So when it comes to the technology, it depends on what the radios are in there. At this time, it would be for LTE, but 5G is coming in the next few years, and at some point, this may be a 5G tower, yes.
Okay. And question for you, Your Worship, just process, if we vote in favor of this today, this still goes to a council meeting for a final decision?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. Any other comments from council at this time? Okay, thank you very much for your input. I will call the question, and all those in favor? Passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to presentations. And I know I saw Dawn Dunlop in the gallery this morning. Good morning, Dawn. Nice to have you here.
Good morning. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, Patty. Thank you for coming and presenting to us.
So I think you've all had the slides, so I'll present. Do you have any questions around that first? And I'll just highlight before I introduce Dawn and just take on the next parts.
Thank you.
Any questions from there? So do I click this? Can I move to the next slide?
Yes. How do we do that?
I don't do that. Just click?
Yep, that's right.
All right. So what is social development and planning? Well, I'm sure you guys all know what we're asking for is the social planning part of it. And for me, what is planning? It is be prepared for the worst and hope for the best, which I probably have messed up that quote somewhere. I believe that's Benjamin Franklin's. So I believe you get it. So why social planning? And for me, it's a vision of prepared prevention and a prepared navigation connection for the unknown, to calm the emotional side of our community, the fear. So I'm sure each of you have been approached recently about some issues that have been in media and have taxed our little community, and we've made some news. And I'm thinking with a plan in place, we could benefit for all of us to be able to provide productive, positive direction, leadership, and common distress. We believe this is an opportunity to begin meeting this community's growing social needs, as we're growing really quickly, as we've all heard. We've made 6 in Canada, which of course attracts more people coming in. So this could help, the planning could help to support our community in feeling safe and secure as a whole. So I guess that's the what and why for me. And I guess I also brought up a little bit of the risks, which Dawn will get into a little more. But more importantly, other communities have provided productive and positive outcomes from planning, as well as our ask. Dawn?
Morning.
Good morning.
Move fast along a bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the risks of not moving forward with this. So Patty and Kim's also in the gallery. We talked a little bit about the risks of not moving forward. And so some risks of not moving forward is missed opportunities. So right now the Community Action Initiative has funds for municipalities to apply for up to $50,000 to have a community opioid plan developed. Some may say in this community that we don't have an opioid crisis. I would disagree. We have an opioid crisis in every single community in this province. And preventative planning, and sometimes we think of why does something have to be a crisis for us to respond instead of doing preventative planning so we don't have a crisis. Planning in crisis is not good planning. So that's some missed opportunities that are happening, and the role in relation in regards to municipal leadership in regards to social development. Also too, we're really clear on the committee of what we're asking the city to do. We're not asking the city to be a funder. We're not asking the city to be a social delivery agent. So we're really clear in regards to what the role is. Some ad hoc decisions have unintended consequences and are not aligned. I'll talk a little bit about that, about the panhandling situation. So as we know, there was a decision made in spring. I spoke up against it, saying I don't think we were ready as a community to have a plan. My concern with moving forward and agreeing to the plan is that the pressure would be off. And in my opinion, that's what's happened since then. There was some great ideas of some things that we could do as a collective community, and in my opinion, nothing has been done in regards to moving that forward, because sometimes that's that push, right? And maybe the downtown issue has been somewhat resolved, but I mean, it's just moved to another community or another area of our community. So what's some other risks of not moving forward with this is an increased safety risk, and also an escalation of problems in our community. We're really a hub, as everyone knows, on the Trans-Canada Highway and the 97, so we have lots of traffic moving through. We are a growing community, and also with that, social issues will grow and get complex. I think those are some of the risks of not moving forward, but I also want to talk about a success. So I think about 6 years ago, I came to this committee and was talking about the role of municipal leadership in regards to housing. And I think, wow, what a change we have made in those last few years. That in order, we actually now probably, I think it is the largest housing development in the interior BC, being partnership with BC Housing. And why that happened is because all the partners started working together and having a role, and the city leadership took that same position. If the city did not support our housing application, we wouldn't be here and in a year have 105 new units in our community. So I think when we look at some of the successes of when we work together in community, this is what the outcomes can be. So we're going to talk a little bit. So Patty talked a little bit, and you saw on the slides about the why and the what. And so we're going to talk about some models that are happening in other communities to give you some context. So Vernon contracts out their social planning to the Social Planning Council of North Okanagan, and that Sharkey is the lead of that. So the city of Vernon gives that organization funds every year, and they have a social plan. So there's just some literature about them as well as the website. Kamloops and Kelowna, again, these are larger cities, so not totally aligned, but that these are specific, they have departments in both of their cities. The two larger projects for Kelowna are the Strong Neighborhood Projects and the Journey Home Project. So these are full departments within the cities that have staff dedicated to this portfolio. So the one we're going to talk a little bit more is Revelstoke. Our organization serves Revelstoke, so I work very closely with Jill Zacharias, who is the city employee in Revelstoke. So it's been going on for about 10 years. Jill's a part-time staff. I think she's 0.8, and in her 10 years, she has brought in over $800,000 into the community. They've developed 9 social plans. All plans are based on research, data collection, facilitation, community consultation, and engagement. And so this is just a small sampling of the outcomes that they've been able to leverage this one part-time position in regards to this. In this situation, the city of Revelstoke is not a funder, does not deliver service. What it does is convene all of the groups working together and then aligns the priorities. So everyone does their piece of the pie, but there's a larger strategy of what we're collectively trying to achieve. So that's something that we would really encourage to look like here in this community. And then this is their systems map. So from this is their map of all the priorities and projects and trying to link all the connections of what are they trying to achieve collectively with this work. So that is some why and what and some models, and now this is our ask. So our ask is to be bold and move forward with our brand. that being a small city with big ideas is not just about physical infrastructure. It's about the health and wellness of people in this community. Sometimes we wait for things to be perfect before we start, and we're asking to, let's just start. Part of it is that it's an iterative process. So today we talked about the why and why is important. So we're asking today to take next steps to set this into action. Make creating a healthy community a priority in Salmon Arm. Invest time, resources, and funds to social development and planning. Let's work together to figure out the what and the how. And then once we have a plan, then implement. So that's what our ask is. Now, if you ask how we think, what are some next steps to get there, we have some suggestions of how we think that may play out. So what we're asking for this year is that we allocate staff resource time to lead this process, that this be a priority in this next year. So we ask for a staff designated to lead this process. The other thing we're asking for is an allocation between $10,000 to $15,000. In my understanding, there may be some grants available, that we allocate $10,000 to $15,000 in this year's budget to develop a model. Now, what we're saying is don't implement the plan. We're saying take time to assess, study, have conversations, look at partnerships, dialogues. Do we do this with the city? How do we do this with our Indigenous neighbors? How do we collectively do this with maybe CSRD? Right? So when we look at the Shuswap. So it takes some time in the next year to really assess what is this model. In my opinion, this plan should identify the importance of a lead. This is not work that can be off the side of somebody's desk. This is complex systems issues work that involves complex solutions. So after we use this next year to plan out what we want, by next year we'll know how we want this to look like so that we budget funds for the next fiscal year and we annualize those costs. So we know what that ask is going to be and that we do that. And then what we can do is then if we implement in 2021, then what we do is work with partners to develop a healthy community work plan and a strategy like what Revelstoke had done. That work wasn't the first year of work, that was after 10 years of work. But at least the first few years will be developing relationships, figuring out our role, looking at best practices, and then developing a healthy community work plan and strategy. And then also we're asking that we embed this culture of how we work in a new way with social planning. We embed this work in all of our city planning documents with your OCP and strategic plan and all those documents. So that's our ask.
Great, thank you very much, Don. Thank you for presenting. Thank you, Patty and Kim, for being here. I'll just open it up to council to see if there's council comments or questions that they have at this time.
Nope.
Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. I want to thank the members of the Social Impact Advisory Committee. It's been an honor and a pleasure to work with you these last 5 years, and we have worked hard to narrow down the role that the city can play in social planning and social development. Clearly, the committee understands that the city is not in the social development business, but we also know, as you say, from the housing example, that when we convey the table, present the data, advocate, and do some planning and preparation around that we can be very successful. And so you're absolutely right that 100 units is a game changer. It had nothing to do with the city other than us supporting the work of the non-profit service sector. Now, I think it's important for council to understand that there's virtually no formal social planning done in this region. There are dozens of groups working independently with their own budget, their own mission, their own vision, their own work plan. But they all have at their core the well-being of community members. I think there's wide recognition even at the province that we can do a much better job of this by planning forward rather than planning for disaster. And at UBCM, there was a new announcement for some funds as well as a re-announcement of some existing funds. And I would encourage council to take this presentation and this ask and to look seriously at making application for those funds so that we could in fact get this done for our community. And it really is an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. And as you say, I don't want to look back in 10 years and go, we knew this was coming and we didn't do enough, or we could have done more. So council knows I'm a big advocate for this. I'm not asking council to be in the social development delivery. I'm merely asking us to take a lead role in conveying and supporting and planning with data and metrics and goals and objectives, so that we're all working towards a good outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh-Richmond. Councillor Eliason.
Yeah, and thanks for all your work, and thanks to everyone else who's done a lot of work. We do need to have a plan, and we do need to have the knowledge of where we're going to go and how we're going to be proactive in this. We got really lucky in the fact that we had a project ready to go and the timing was right, and we were able to work collaboratively as a team to access the new funds that were available. My worry is that sometimes those taps that have those funds get turned off. So I don't want to be the last person at the table with money. And so any plan or anything that we have has to rely on zero city money and almost zero reliance for guaranteed funding from higher levels of government. It's been done before, and it will happen again. I know this, and I'm worried about it. Housing dollars don't always continue to flow. Social wellness dollars don't always continue to flow. Daycare dollars don't always continue to flow. Because prior to this one, when was the last social housing development in Salmon Arm that we initiated?
In the 90s.
In the 90s,
Yep.
right? And Foxcroft was a one-off,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there's our history. And so while the iron is hot, we should strike and we should be ready and we should advocate for every project that we can. But we also have to be cognizant that this is going to be an ongoing issue, and having the plan will be very important. But how that plan is resourced will be even more important. And we at this table do not have a method for taxation to deliver the social wellness programs that are required. It's not really within anything in the Constitution that says we develop social programs. We will take care of you when you die by providing a cemetery. But until then, it's not necessarily our mandate or our function of taxation. So we should have a plan, because that plan will allow us to access those dollars while they're available. So thank you for your work. I support the work and think we should continue doing the work, but I don't want to overcommit on the funding part from this side for the work.
Thank you, Councillor Eliason. Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Harrison. Thanks, Patty and Don, for the presentation. Kim back there too for the support of this. So this is a conversation, actually, it's timely. So I'm assuming that this is an ask to be put into the budget process. That's number one. It's probably a discussion. I felt this for quite a while. I think at this table the topic has been there, but we haven't really discussed it at this table. There's been all sorts of ideas emanating out from social impact about we need to move this way, but we haven't got to a point where we said where we are in the spectrum of yay, nay, or support, or phase, or whatever else. So again, I think that's part of it. And the discussion actually is not well served during the budget time as we go through a full day of budgeting, and there's not a lot of philosophical discussion at that point. So thanks for bringing that up, or for raising it here now. I have a couple of questions. How would a social planning table differ from social impact?
Really, how it would, we really see it differing about having a key lead person at the city. This work right now with the city is off the side of everyone's desk, and there's not a key person to work with. So we look at some of the crises that have happened in our community, and one just a couple of weeks ago that were significant. There was not a response from the city. In regards to, because it was like, well, I'm not sure where that fit, who that goes with. Again, so what we're saying is who is a key person in the infrastructure of the city to do that. This may have been kind of like, where did this ask come from? Ever since this committee was formed under Marty, and we had Ivan as the chair, and then we had Ken and now Louise. This has been a conversation, but we just said, we need to ask. We need to ask what we want. So what we don't see this as being a funder or a deliverer of service. That's what we do. Right? We don't want a competitor, right? We do this work. But in regards to strategic prioritization, what would you say are the top 3 or 4 social issues that we want to address in this city? We can't say that because we don't know that. So how do we be smart and strategic and leverage the dollars that are out there? And also being clear of what is the municipal's role in relation to this work. You don't want to take on provincial and federal responsibilities. And trust us, we're not advocating for that. But what is the city's role in regards to hitting these targets and doing these things? And what are those 3 or 4 activities that we're focusing on? And then how do we leverage that to bring in millions of dollars? The project that we're bringing over is over $30 million, right? So again, when you look at the city's investment of what that was, which was really 60 grand, except for time and resources of staff, that was working. That we had that figured out, but we want to continue to do that in housing and in opioid crisis and in we want to be doing that work this kind of way moving forward. And what we see that being is really a lead person. And then how does that work? And then that whole year to assess that or look at that is, well, whose pen's going to be on the file once we have the housing strategy developed? Is this an in-house position? Is this an out-of-house position? There's lots of different models. Do you work with a partner organization already? Do you create a new society? Please no, don't do that. Right, but how do we do that? Is there an opportunity to work with CSRD on this? Maybe not for Revelstoke and Golden, but for the Shuswap. Again, when we're looking at healthy communities and the system's impact, when we're talking about transportation, you can't talk about City of Salmon Arm and transportation without talking, there's no bus service to Sicamous. Right, so again, there's an opportunity for us to work with our partners in a new way about doing this work. We're not saying build a large infrastructure in the city. We're saying we're asking for really a person.
So thank you for that. And the power of convening a table and who's best suited to convene that, I get. And I will ponder this a little bit. I mean, my first reaction is what role does Social Impact Committee play as well in this? So the ask, if I understand it then, is
to allocate $10,000 to $15,000 in this year's budget. My understanding, there's some grants available to make this a priority, to assess and review it. And then once we kind of know what the plan says, how do we want to do this, then we figure out what the budget allocation is at moving forward. We're really, this year, we're asking for, we think between $10,000 and $15,000.
To make a city plan or a community plan?
Well, I would encourage you to look broader than the city,
no,
right?
I'm trying to dot the i's here, Dawn, yes. and cross the t's. It also says, and again, a plan would come out with this stuff, but what sort of annualized cost in the city budget?
Well, again, that sometimes we always think it has to be perfect to start. When you think of where Revelstoke started, Jill was part-time. I mean, an outcome could be you have a 0.5 person who's a social development planner in the city, right? Who has their pen on the file for housing and homelessness and the opioid crisis and neighborhood planning and all those kinds of things, right? I mean, it's a start. It doesn't have to be, and we also need to be mindful of our size and how do we grow.
Okay, and again, I'm gonna try to narrow down a bit from my perspective here too. Is that, but the intent of this is the proposal is a city position as opposed to, or a city-funded position as opposed to a community-funded position?
Well, I would say what we're asking for this year is $10,000 to $15,000 to make the plan. We look at economic development, that's not an in-house, you subcontract that out to a society. So when you look at all those models that are happening in different communities, look at what is a Shuswap Salmon Arm model that makes some sense. Does it make to be in-house? Does it make to be out-house? Does it make to also partner with an organization that's doing some of this work, right? So that would be the year and the time to plan what makes sense, right? So that's why we're not asking for this now, because we don't know what we're asking for. We're asking for a little bit of money now to start planning, and then once we know what we want, then let's figure out how we make it happen.
Okay, thank you for that. So the ask at this stage for this coming budget, $15,000 to strategize, make a plan.
Yeah.
who makes that, how does that happen? Assuming they're,
Convening of partners, it's looking at models, it's, again, who's the resource? The other ask we had is allocate some staff resource time, right? And so how does that work? I mean, one of the things that's gonna come out of the housing study is who has their pen on the housing file after the study is done, right? So some of this work is already happening, right? So I'd say convene a table, you can use the Social Impact Advisory Committee, but also too, that there's a dedicated person that's helping us put this plan to fruition or what it looks like.
yeah. Thank you for that. And you know, I have so much respect for the work that organizations do. I'm going to say right now, the staffing ask part or the implement, I probably am more comfortable with the plan request at this stage.
We have lots of capacity in this community, so I think all that stuff can be figured out and doable.
Yeah, I just want to put
Yeah.
where my thinking is, what part of my brain is right now, and certainly give it due consideration during the budget process. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Councillor Lavery, you're right that this ask will certainly go to the budget. This is our opportunity to talk to Don about information. We're not debating the budget piece right this minute. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, a lot of my questions have been answered, and again, thank you for what you do, but I'm still struggling with the mandate creep of us into provincial, federal. I mean, you talk about healthy communities, well, there's a federal or provincial healthy communities committee. I'm struggling with why this didn't come from the Social Impact Advisory Committee as a recommendation to, we need to put more teeth into this committee. To me, the process is flawed because we have a Social Impact Advisory Committee, and to me, if the chair of that with members of that committee came to us and said, this needs to be more than just a committee, we need some teeth to it, that is the way I think this should have happened. Not saying this isn't valuable, but I too am struggling with whose mandate. Maybe we don't need the Social Impact Advisory Committee because this would replace it, I don't know. So I'm not saying we don't need to do something. I'm concerned about mandate creep. I'm concerned about us taking too much responsibility, and I don't think it would matter how robust a social advisory or impact or this committee we'd had when a private business person doesn't, with what happened, I don't know if that could have been prevented or changed. So, I mean, we have a crisis. You're right, the city did not know what to do with that. Not our mandate, and we can't go and see who's paying their bills and all of that. So I'm not sure this would solve it. I think this should go through the Social Impact Advisory Committee, and there should be a presentation from them if that's what this is it?
Right now we're talking to the person out there.
Okay, sorry, I'm confused.
Yeah, this came from the Social Issue Advisory,
that's-
right?
I didn't
So
know
it's not
that. It
an
seems like it's
individual.
completely separate
No,
because I
it's
think we
from
have
that,
the venue, we just need to staff it is what you're saying.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm confused.
Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I agree that we don't want to be debating this. It's important to recognize that I always talk about opportunity cost. And, you know, this community, yes, municipalities are not typically, their bucket is not social development, but their bucket is paying for additional policing and vandalism and, right? And so sometimes there's an opportunity cost to not doing things, and I just want to re-emphasize that the province is also recognizing this, and that municipalities can play a role in convening a table and gathering the data and then letting the social agencies go and do their work, but at least there's a common lens on it, because there's a chance that we are not, and quite a good chance, that we are not deploying our resources in the most efficient way possible. And there are tens of millions of dollars spent in this community on social development, but there is no overarching plan, capacity, facility, gap, data, metric analysis done. So in a way, we're throwing darts with a blindfold on sometimes. And there's a way to not do that. It's the Spark grant, the Together BC grant, and the conversation about, does this community want to develop economically and not think that there's a social development cost to that. And that's something we all have to wrestle with. So
I think this is also a changing landscape in our community, and the question is, do we want to lean into this or lean out of this? And I want to live in a city that leans into this. I think when you went to UBCM and they talked about resilience and change, I think this is what we're talking about. Cities and communities are changing. How do we be upstream and preventative about it? And when you think about resilience, it's really wellness and health in communities. So I would again request that from the Social Impact Advisory Council, the committee's request is that we dedicate some staff resources and a budget of about $10,000 to $15,000 that we may be able to seek in grants to dig into this. You know, I'll answer all these questions, but then from this next year of exploration, what's the next step? But I don't think leaning out of this and taking a step back is a solution that I would advocate we take.
Thank you. I'll give each councillor that wishes one more opportunity to ask Don any questions that they would like. Councillor Lassen.
Okay, thanks. And I just want to be clear of where I sit on long-term funding and city positions. We rarely add them anyways. So this type of social planning position, no matter how small it is, that would be a real reach for us, no matter what department it would be in. So just to set expectations where I think they should be set, rather than saying, yeah, of course we're going to do this. To provide the money as a matching sort of fund for a grant application for planning, that is our job. That's where our forte comes in. And I know without having that plan, we're not going to get the next level of grants. And so that is where I come from on this and saying, hey, we can go this far. But as far as committing fully or all in or a paid full-time or part-time or point position, I'm not there. But looking to leverage grants, and I think that's the part that will come to our budget meeting, saying, hey, if we get $10,000 here, the government's just announced this, we can also match with this, and here's how we're going to get our $50,000 for our plan. That's the proposal I'd like to see at budget, and then that would be the proposal that I would take to UBCM and advocate for on our behalf if that was possible, or through the minister or the ministries. So that's my position. Thank you for your presentation, and we'll see where it goes.
Thank you, Councillor Lassen. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for clarifying, because I completely did not understand this came from the Social Impact Advisory Committee. I thought this was, okay, another group trying to, so I appreciate that. How many planners do we have, Director of Development Services?
Currently, we have myself, I'm a planner and approving officer for subdivision, and we have 3 planners.
Do any of them have a particular strength or in their background the social planning part of planning?
Not as an expertise background, not expertise in that field. It would be a side of desk, as is other initiatives such as affordable housing strategy, community energy association, all those other things on the periphery that want our full attention.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Harrison, for a second attempt at this. And I also, in thanking the Social Impact Committee and presenters, I wanted to extend my thanks to Councillor Wallace Richmond as well. I would hope that and I don't know the details of the recent announcement, I would hope that we can get that in front of our table through social impact and as quickly as possible. I have no idea whether it's matching funds or whatever else. We need to move on that, and I certainly, and you know, I think that we can consider in the budgeting for planning. Beyond that, though, I just want to put my cards on the table here. With the housing strategy, we've spent a lot of time saying this is a community housing strategy with city participants, whatever how that looks. But again, I'll say my comments for later. But the dedicated staffing part of it, the annualized staffing part of it, is a threshold right now that I have to think really long and hard about. But certainly finding out the details of the application opportunities that we have and looking at planning is something that I can give full and due consideration to.
Great, thank you, Councillor Lavery. So I think in conclusion, what I'm hearing from Council is it would be useful to have the details of the SPARK and the poverty reduction grant possibilities and understanding those better for our budget table. And having you come here will place this your presentation into the budget mix. And so certainly we'll be addressing that at that time. Is there anything else you want to add, Dawn?
Just clarifying that the grant on the table right now is the Community Action Initiative, and so that's $5,000 to $50,000 for cities to apply to have a community opioid crisis plan, to develop a plan. So it's CAI, not Spark.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, and the more we learn about that, the better, so appreciate it. Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillors, is there any other business that we have this morning? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Eliason, Councillor Cannon. All those in favor? Thank you very much to people in the gallery and staff this morning.